The stars looked different from the viewing deck of the UES horizon. Captain Alan Wright stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the massive hegemony station grow larger as they approached. After decades of scanning the skies, humanity had finally made contact with alien life. Not just any aliens, but a vast empire spanning thousands of star systems. The Galactic Hegemony, they called themselves. Alan felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to see his daughter Lily, her eyes wide with wonder as she pressed her face against the reinforced glass. "Are those really aliens, Dad?" Lily asked, her 8-year-old voice filled with excitement. "Yes, sweetheart. We're the first humans to visit their home station." He squeezed her hand. "Remember what we talked about. Be polite. Stay close to me or Mom." From behind them, Dr. Elizabeth Wright approached. Her uniform identified her as the mission's lead xenobiologist. "Diplomatic party assembles in 20 minutes, she said, kneeling to straighten Lily's collar. "How's my brave explorer?" "I'm not scared," Lily said, though she gripped her father's hand tighter. The family had been chosen specifically for this mission. Earth's leadership thought sending a family unit might show the hegemony that humans were peaceful. Alan sometimes worried about bringing Lily, but Elizabeth had insisted. "This is history," she had said. "Our daughter should be part of it." Hours later, the human delegation stood in a vast chamber aboard the hegemony station. Beings of various shapes and sizes moved around them. Some had scaled skin, others multiple limbs, and a few floated rather than walked. The air smelled of strange spices and mechanical oil. The hegemony ambassador, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms named Vorkath, bowed slightly. "We welcome Earth's representatives. Your journey across the stars shows admirable determination." Alan stepped forward. "The people of Earth thank you for this historic opportunity. We come in peace, seeking friendship and knowledge." Vorkath's mouth formed what might have been a smile. "The hegemony offers both. We have helped many developing species join galactic society." The diplomatic meeting proceeded smoothly. The hegemony offered cultural exchange programs and limited technology sharing. They spoke of trade possibilities and scientific cooperation. Everything seemed promising. Later, in their private quarters, Elizabeth reviewed her notes while Alan prepared Lily for bed. "They're being generous," Elizabeth said. "Almost too generous." Alan tucked Lily in. "You think they're hiding something. I think any species that builds an empire this size didn't do it by being completely open." She sighed. "But their medical technology alone could advance Earth medicine by centuries." "Dad," Lily called from her bed. "The alien with the big eyes kept watching me today." Alan returned to her bedside. "They're curious about us, just like we're curious about them." He felt cold. Lily pulled her blanket higher. "Like when Dr. Miller gives me shots but doesn't smile." Alan kissed her forehead. "Just remember, we're making history. Now get some sleep." What Alan and Elizabeth couldn't know was that elsewhere on the station, a very different meeting was taking place. In a sealed chamber, 7 high-ranking hegemony officials gathered around a table displaying human biological scans. "Their adaptive capabilities are concerning," said one official. "Their brains show unusual plasticity. Their psychological profiles suggest extreme resilience and unpredictable response patterns," added another. "If allowed to develop further, they could become problematic." Vorkath, who had greeted the humans hours earlier, placed 4 hands on the table. "The Supreme Council has classified humans as a potential threat species. Recommendation is containment rather than full integration." "And the child specimen?" asked an official in the shadows. "Perfect for our purposes," replied Vorkath. "Young enough for detailed study. We require comprehensive understanding of human physiology before making further decisions about Earth." "Prepare the security exercise scenario," ordered the highest-ranking official. "The parents must believe it was an accident." Back in their quarters, Alan Wright looked in on his sleeping daughter one last time before turning in. Tomorrow would bring another day of historic diplomacy. He had no idea that the hegemony had already decided humanity's fate, and his daughter would be the first casualty. The second day of meetings went well. Too well, Alan thought as he watched Vorkath lead them through the huge hegemony flagship. Something about the alien's interest in human biology made him uneasy. Elizabeth didn't share his worry. She walked ahead with a group of alien scientists, asking questions about their medical advances. Lily stayed close to her father. She wore her best blue dress for what Vorkath called a ceremonial tour of their most important ship. The massive vessel could hold a small city. Its halls shone with a light that wasn't quite natural. And here, Vorkath said with his strange not-quite smile, is our central command center. Few outsiders ever see this place. The room opened before them, filled with screens and strange controls. Alien crew members moved with purpose around workstations. Lily gripped Alan's hand tighter as they entered. "It's okay," he whispered to her. "Remember, we're guests here." Vorkath guided them to a viewing platform. From here, our commanders direct ships across 20 sectors of space. Elizabeth took notes on her tablet. The coordination required must be enormous. Indeed, Vorkath agreed. Your species may one day achieve such. A loud alarm cut through the air. Red lights flashed across the command center. Alien crew members moved with sudden speed. "What's happening?" Alan asked, pulling Lily closer. Vorkath raised all four hands. "Please remain calm. It appears a security exercise has begun. Unfortunately, the timing is." More alarms sounded. The doors to the command center sealed shut. Confusion spread among both humans and aliens. Orders were shouted in the hegemony language, too fast for the human translators to catch. "Elizabeth," Alan called over the noise. His wife pushed through the crowd toward him. A group of armed hegemony security forces entered. They moved with precision, separating the aliens from the humans. "This is just a drill," one of them said in halting English. "Please follow security protocols." Alan felt Lily's hand slip from his as the crowd pushed between them. "Lily," he shouted, trying to keep sight of her blue dress. "Dad." Her voice came from somewhere across the room. The security forces directed the human delegation toward a side chamber. "For your protection," they insisted. "My daughter." Alan fought against their guidance. "I need to find my daughter." Elizabeth tried to push past two guards. "Let us find her. She's just a child." The confusion lasted 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the alarms finally stopped, the human delegation was held in a small room away from the command center. Alan and Elizabeth demanded answers, but the hegemony officials would only say the situation was under control. When Vorkath finally entered the room, his silver skin seemed duller. His four arms hung at his sides. "Captain Wright, Dr. Wright," he said, his voice flat. "I must inform you of an unfortunate accident." Alan felt his world collapse before the words were even spoken. "During the security exercise, there was an incident. Your daughter was separated from the group and entered a restricted area. When security forces responded to the breach," Vorkath paused. "There was weapons fire. She was struck. Our medical teams did everything possible, but the damage was too severe." Elizabeth screamed. Alan caught her as her legs gave way. "This cannot be true," he said, his voice hollow. "I grieve with you," Vorkath said. "This tragic accident will be fully investigated. The hegemony offers its deepest regrets." The next hours passed in a blur. They were shown Lily's body, peaceful and still, as if sleeping. Elizabeth, trained as a doctor, checked for herself. Hands shaking as she confirmed what they were told. Their daughter was gone. The hegemony offered compensation according to their customs. They promised changes to security protocols. They expressed formal regret for the unfortunate circumstances. 3 days later, the UES Horizon left the hegemony station. In the cargo hold, a small stasis pod held Lily's body for the journey home. Alan and Elizabeth Wright sat in their quarters, surrounded by silence and grief. What they didn't know. In a secured laboratory deep within the Hegemony flagship, researchers reviewed their findings from the carefully planned study of human physiology. Specimen L1, as they designated her in their reports, had provided valuable data on human resilience, pain response, and biological function. The experiment was deemed a success. 6 months had passed since Lily's death. Earth continued its careful relations with the Hegemony. Trade agreements were signed. Knowledge was exchanged. On the surface, the tragic incident was treated as an unfortunate accident in the path of progress. Dr. Susan Collins worked late in her lab at the North American Medical Center. She had been friends with Elizabeth Wright since college. When Elizabeth asked her to look at Lily's tissue samples one more time, Susan couldn't refuse, even though she knew it wouldn't bring the child back. Susan stared at her screen, then rubbed her tired eyes. She had run the tests 3 times now. Each time, the results made less sense. "Computer, compare these tissue samples with the Hegemony report again," she said. The screen filled with data. Susan leaned forward, her heart beating faster. The official report claimed Lily died from energy weapon damage. But the cellular breakdown pattern was all wrong. These weren't heat or energy burns. The damage was precise, controlled, and methodical. Susan picked up her phone and dialed Elizabeth. "I need you to come to the lab," she said when her friend answered. "Now." An hour later, Elizabeth stood frozen as Susan explained her findings. "These aren't weapon burns, Elizabeth. The tissue damage shows deliberate incisions, multiple samples taken from different organs, and look at these chemical markers." Susan pointed to the screen. "These are from a Hegemony compound that preserves living tissue during examination." Elizabeth gripped the edge of the table. "What are you saying?" Susan took a deep breath. "Lily wasn't killed in crossfire. The evidence suggests she was." Susan struggled to find gentle words, but there were none. She was subjected to a methodical examination, while still alive. Elizabeth's face went white. "They cut her open. They experimented on her. The evidence suggests it was deliberate, clinical, and..." Susan hesitated. "And what?" Elizabeth's voice was barely a whisper. "The precision of the work, the methodology. This wasn't the work of rogue actors. This bears all the hallmarks of an authorized procedure." Across the city, in a secure building underneath the United Earth Defense Headquarters, Commander Peter Bennett hunched over his desk. For months, his team had worked to crack the encryption on Hegemony communications. Tonight, they had finally succeeded. Bennett's eyes narrowed as he read the translated documents. The Hegemony classified humans as developmental threats to be studied and potentially neutralized before achieving greater technological advancement. Multiple reports referenced a specimen L1 with detailed biological data. His assistant entered the room. "Sir, you need to see this. The medical examiner who handled the Wright girl's body just contacted our secure line. She says she's found evidence that contradicts the official Hegemony report." Bennett's jaw tightened. "Get me a secure line to the Joint Chiefs. Now." 2 days later, an emergency council convened in an underground facility. Military leaders, scientists, and government officials filled the room. Susan Collins presented her findings. Commander Bennett shared the decrypted Hegemony documents. Admiral Grace Johnson, the highest-ranking military officer present, listened without expression. When the presentations finished, the room erupted in angry discussion. "We should demand explanations from the Hegemony immediately. They're too powerful. We need to build our defenses first. We should cut all diplomatic ties." Admiral Johnson raised her hand. The room fell silent. "They killed a child," she said quietly. "Not in war, not by accident. They took her apart to see how she worked, while she was conscious." No one spoke. "This isn't about diplomacy anymore," Johnson continued. "They've shown us what they are. Now we show them what we are." The Joint Chiefs nodded in agreement. "What do you propose, Admiral?" asked the Defense Secretary. On the surface, we continue relations normally. They think we're primitive, so let them keep thinking that. Johnson's eyes were steel. Meanwhile, we prepare. Every resource, every mind, every asset we have goes toward one goal. And that is making them pay for what they did to Lily Wright. Johnson looked around the room. As of this moment, Earth is at war with the hegemony. They just don't know it yet. In their home, Alan and Elizabeth Wright received a visit from men and women in dark suits. After they left, Alan held his wife as she cried tears of rage rather than grief. "They'll pay," he whispered. "Every last one of them will pay." Project Nemesis took shape in hidden facilities around Earth. For the next 6 months, the planet's best minds worked day and night. On the surface, trade with the hegemony continued. Diplomatic meetings were held. Humans smiled and nodded at their alien friends. Below ground, they prepared for war. Alan Wright now wore the uniform of an admiral. Elizabeth headed the Biological Research Division. Their grief had hardened into purpose. Today, they stood in a vast underground hangar with Admiral Johnson and other project leaders. Before them was the first warship built with reverse-engineered hegemony technology. "The UES Retribution," Johnson said, looking at the sleek vessel. "First of her class. 6 more under construction at hidden facilities around the solar system." "How long until she's ready?" Alan asked. 3 weeks, replied Chief Engineer Frank Dixon. "We've incorporated the shield modifications Dr. Lee developed, and those propulsion improvements from the captured hegemony scout ship made a big difference." Elizabeth studied the data on her tablet. "My team has made progress on the biological front. The hegemony consists of 7 main species, each with different vulnerabilities. We've developed targeted countermeasures for 5 so far." Johnson nodded. "And the Information Warfare Division?" A thin man stepped forward. Jack Morris headed Earth's best hackers and computer scientists. "We've identified critical weaknesses in their network architecture," Morris said. "They rely heavily on connected systems. Once we're in, we can move laterally through their entire command structure." "They think we're too primitive to be a threat," Johnson said. "That's our advantage." Later that day, Alan sat alone in his office. He opened a drawer and took out a small frame. Inside was a photo of Lily, smiling on her 8th birthday. He touched the glass gently. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Elizabeth entered, looking tired but determined. "The neural team needs approval for the next phase," she said, setting down a folder. Alan nodded. "Did you ever think we'd be here? Planning a war against an empire that spans thousands of worlds." Elizabeth sat across from him. "I never thought our daughter would be cut open by aliens while she was still alive." Alan flinched at the words but didn't disagree. "The hegemony has existed for 30,000 years," Elizabeth continued. "They've conquered and absorbed hundreds of species. They believe themselves untouchable. And we've only been in space for a century," Alan said. "But they made a mistake." Elizabeth's eyes were hard. "They showed us what they are before we showed them what we are." Across the facility, in a secure communications room, Commander Bennett received an encrypted message from one of their spies in hegemony space. He quickly brought the information to Johnson. "The Hegemony Council is planning a full assessment of Earth next month," Bennett reported. "They want to determine how quickly we're advancing and whether we need to be contained more actively." "How actively?" Johnson asked. "The report mentions options ranging from limiting our technology access to sterilizing the planet's surface." Johnson's face showed no emotion. "Then we need to accelerate our timeline." She called an emergency meeting of the project leaders. When everyone had gathered, Johnson laid out the situation. "We've just learned the hegemony is considering more direct action against Earth. We don't have the luxury of time anymore. All projects must be operational in 4 weeks, not 3 months." Protests filled the room. "That's not possible. The systems aren't fully tested. We'll lose good people rushing like this." Johnson waited for the voices to die down. "I understand your concerns, But consider the alternative. If we wait, there might not be an Earth to defend. She looked around the room. Remember why we're doing this. Remember Lily Wright. Remember what they did to her, what they'll do to all of us if they decide we're a threat. The room fell silent. 1 month, Johnson said. In 1 month, we either strike first, or we may not get to strike at all. As the meeting broke up, Alan caught up with Johnson in the hallway. Grace, he said quietly, do we have a chance? Really? Johnson looked at him for a long moment. They have the numbers. They have the technology. They have the experience. She paused. But they've never faced humans before, and they have no idea what we're capable of when we're fighting for our children. 1 year after Lily's death, the Grand Hall of the Hegemony Central Station gleamed with light. Important officials from many worlds gathered for the annual renewal of diplomatic ties. Humans had been invited for the first time, a sign of their growing acceptance in galactic society. Ambassador Kevin Price led the Earth delegation. He was tall and polished in his formal uniform. His staff moved with quiet confidence among the alien beings. No one watching would guess that each human carried secret orders beyond their diplomatic mission. Vorkath approached the human group, all 4 arms extended in the traditional greeting. His silver skin reflected the room's bright lights. Ambassador Price, we are pleased by Earth's continued friendship. Your species adapts well to galactic society. Price smiled with perfect diplomacy. The people of Earth value our relationship with the hegemony. We have learned much in this first year. Indeed, Vorkath said, and there is much more to share. The Council has approved expanded technology exchanges. Your medical sciences, in particular, will benefit greatly. The formal ceremony lasted 3 hours. Representatives from 50 worlds renewed their pledges to the hegemony. Earth was called last, as the newest associate member. Price spoke the required words with just the right amount of respect and gratitude. When the ceremony ended, Price approached Vorkath privately. If possible, I request a brief audience with the Supreme Council, Price said. Earth has a special message of thanks we wish to deliver personally. Vorkath seemed pleased. This is unusual, but I will arrange it. The Council will be honored by Earth's special attention. 30 minutes later, Price was led into the Council chamber. 7 high-ranking hegemony leaders sat in a half-circle on raised platforms. These were the true rulers of thousands of worlds. Ambassador Price, said the central figure, we understand you bring a special message from Earth. Price bowed. Yes, honored counselors. 1 year ago, a terrible tragedy occurred during our first diplomatic mission. The death of Lily Wright was a painful moment in our new relationship. The council members shifted slightly. One spoke up. A regrettable accident. Compensation was provided according to our customs. Yes, Price agreed. Earth officially accepted your explanation and your payment. He paused. However, I am here today with new information. Price removed a small device from his pocket. He placed it on the floor and stepped back. A hologram appeared in the center of the room. The image showed Lily Wright strapped to a table. Hegemony medical staff moved around her. The recording had no sound, but it was clear the child was awake and terrified as they began their procedures. The council chamber went completely still. Price let the recording play for 30 seconds, then shut it off. His voice, when he spoke again, was ice cold. This was recovered from your own security systems. We have the complete record of what really happened to Lily Wright. We know it was not an accident. We know it was approved by this council. The central counselor rose. Ambassador Price, there seems to be a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Price cut in. Earth now possesses the full evidence file. We have your classified reports designating humans as developmental threats to be studied and neutralized. The council members looked at each other. One touched a panel on his chair, likely calling security. Price smiled thinly. Don't bother. Your guards are currently dealing with some technical issues. What is the meaning of this? Demanded the central counselor. If Earth wishes to lodge a formal complaint, There are proper channels. Price walked to the center of the room. He stood tall, his voice clear. This is not a complaint. This is a warning. He looked at each council member in turn. You killed our child. We know what you are now. He turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. We suggest you run. Within hours, all human embassies across hegemony space began emergency evacuations. All trade ships jumped to light speed, heading for Earth space. All communication channels between humans and the hegemony went silent. The Council initially dismissed the implied threat. Humans were primitives, barely space-capable. What could they possibly do against the might of the hegemony? Then reports began to arrive. 3 major military outposts had gone completely silent during the human withdrawal. A research station found all its data systems wiped. A border monitoring post discovered unknown devices attached to its power core. For the first time in thousands of years, the Hegemony Supreme Council felt something they had forgotten existed. Fear. The Hegemony Supreme Council did not run. Instead, they sent warships. Primitives need to be taught their place, the head counselor declared. 10 battle cruisers, each carrying enough firepower to level a continent, set course for Earth. They would make an example of the humans. The hegemony fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. Their commander, War Master Drax, was one of the Empire's most decorated officers. He had crushed rebellions on 20 worlds. His ships formed up in the standard attack pattern. Send the demand for surrender, Drax ordered. Give them 1 hour to respond before we begin orbital bombardment. His communications officer worked the controls. Sir, the message is sent, but we're receiving no acknowledgement. Drax frowned. Scan the system. Find their defensive positions. The sensors swept space around them. The officers looked confused. Sir, we detect no defense fleet, no orbital weapons platforms, just civilian stations, and wait. The sensor operator adjusted his controls. Something's approaching from behind the 4th planet. A single ship emerged from behind Mars. It was smaller than the hegemony cruisers, sleek and dark against the stars. Drax laughed. 1 ship. Earth sends 1 ship against 10 cruisers. The human vessel transmitted a message. On the main screen, Admiral Alan Wright appeared. His eyes were hard, his face showing no fear. Hegemony Fleet, this is Admiral Wright of the UES Retribution. You are in Earth space without permission. Leave now or be destroyed. The Hegemony bridge crew looked at each other in disbelief. Arrogant primitives, Drax said. Target their vessel. Full weapons barrage. Energy beams lanced out from the hegemony ships, converging on the single Earth vessel. The crew waited for the satisfying explosion. It never came. The human ship's shields glowed briefly but held. The vessel accelerated toward the hegemony fleet. Impossible, Drax whispered. Their shields should have failed instantly. Sir, they're launching something, his weapons officer reported. Small objects, hundreds of them. Tiny drones swarmed from the Earth ship, moving faster than the hegemony tracking systems could follow. They attached themselves to the hulls of the alien vessels. Report, Drax demanded. Unknown devices attached to our ships, sir. They're bypassing our shield frequencies somehow. Suddenly, alarms blared across the hegemony flagship. Ship after ship reported systems failures, weapons going offline, engines shutting down, life support flickering. On the 3rd cruiser, the crew panicked as a strange mist began seeping through the ventilation system. Within minutes, they collapsed, unable to breathe the suddenly hostile air. What's happening? Drax demanded. His second-in-command looked up from a console, face pale. Some kind of computer virus is spreading through our network. It's shutting down our systems one by one. Impossible. Our systems are secure against. Sir, we're being hailed again. Admiral Wright appeared on screen once more. Behind him stood a woman Drax didn't recognize. She stepped forward. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Wright, she said. Her voice was calm, clinical. You're experiencing a targeted biological agent specific to your species' respiratory system. Your crew members are not dead, merely paralyzed. The effect is temporary. Drax struggled to understand. How did you? We studied you, Elizabeth continued, just as you studied our daughter. The difference is, she was 8 years old and innocent. You are warriors who came to destroy our world. Alan Wright took over. Your ships are disabled. Your weapons are offline. Your crews are incapacitated. And this was just one human ship. In desperation, Drax ordered the emergency distress beacon activated. 3 more hegemony fleets would come. Humans couldn't possibly stand against the Empire's full might. If you're thinking of calling for help, Alan said, as if reading his thoughts, don't bother. The quantum communication arrays on all your ships have been specifically targeted. No messages are getting out. Elizabeth stepped closer to the screen. 1 year ago, you took apart our child to see how humans work. Now you know. The transmission cut off. On his failing bridge, surrounded by collapsing crew members, War Master Drax realized the humans had not been exaggerating. They had not been bluffing. They should have run. 3 days later, a single damaged cruiser limped back to hegemony space. Of its 1,000 crew members, only Drax and a handful of officers survived. They carried with them footage of 9 mighty warships destroyed by a single Earth vessel. And a message. This was our answer for one child. Imagine our response if you come again. The news spread quickly through the hegemony. 10 elite warships destroyed by a single human vessel. Impossible, yet the evidence could not be denied. The Supreme Council held emergency meetings. For the first time in thousands of years, they faced an enemy they had underestimated. But humans did not wait for the hegemony to recover. Earth's fleets, hidden and prepared over the past year, emerged from secret shipyards throughout the solar system. 30 vessels, each built with the knowledge gained from studying hegemony technology, jumped into faster-than-light travel. They attacked not the hegemony homeworld, but its supply lines, its communication hubs, its outlying bases. Each human ship carried the same message, broadcast on all frequencies. 1 year ago, you killed a human child named Lily Wright. You were warned to run. You did not listen. With each broadcast, they attached the full evidence file of what had happened to Lily, the complete medical reports, the Council's authorization, the footage of her final moments. On the bridge of the UES Vengeance, Admiral Alan Wright and Dr. Elizabeth Wright watched as another hegemony outpost fell. Status report, Alan ordered. Sir, Outpost 7 has surrendered. No casualties on our side. Minimal casualties on theirs. Elizabeth studied her tablet. The biological countermeasures worked perfectly. Their troops are incapacitated but unharmed, just as planned. This was their strategy. Not to destroy, but to disable. To show mercy where the hegemony had shown none. It made their message all the more powerful. In the capital world of the hegemony, panic grew. Reports flooded in of human ships appearing, striking with surgical precision, and disappearing before defenses could respond. The Council could not understand how their mighty empire was faltering against what should have been an easy conquest. More disturbing were the reports from their subject worlds. Many of the species under hegemony control had received the humans' evidence file. They learned that the same experiments performed on Lily Wright had been carried out on their own people for centuries. Rebellion sparked across a dozen worlds. On the 15th day of the human offensive, the UES Vengeance approached the hegemony homeworld. A massive defense fleet formed a protective ring around the planet. Thousands of ships against one. They'd finally gathered their forces, Alan said, looking at the tactical display. Elizabeth stood beside him. Just as we predicted. Alan opened a channel to the human fleet. All ships, commence Operation Lighthouse. Across hegemony space, every human vessel activated special devices planted during their previous strikes. The quantum communication network that bound the Empire together suddenly carried a new signal. Every screen, every communication device, Every data terminal throughout the hegemony showed the same image. Lily Wright, just before her death. Then the evidence file played everywhere at once, not just to military leaders, but to every citizen of every world. The truth, hidden for so long, laid bare for all to see. On 7 major hegemony worlds, subject species rose up against their rulers. The defense fleet around the homeworld received desperate calls for help from across the empire. Ships peeled away from the formation, rushing to quell the growing rebellions. The Supreme Council, in their protected chamber, watched in horror as their perfect system crumbled. How? The head counselor whispered. How could primitives do this? A transmission came through on a channel that should have been impossible for outsiders to access. Alan and Elizabeth Wright appeared on the council's private screens. You ask how primitives could bring down an empire, Alan said. The answer is simple. You killed our child. You showed us what you truly are. Elizabeth stepped forward, and in doing so, you forced us to become what we needed to be to stop you. We gave you a chance, Alan continued. We warned you to run. The hegemony's grand chamber fell silent as the full defense fleet retreated from Earth's single ship, not out of strategy, but fear. The once mighty galactic hegemony had ruled through terror and cruelty for 30,000 years. It had destroyed countless species that resisted. It had performed unspeakable experiments on those it conquered. But it had never faced humans before. It had never understood what humans would do to avenge one child. The empire that had killed Lily Wright was finished, not destroyed by Earth's weapons, but broken by Earth's truth.